Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To understand that this world is not real, to understand that we live in the midst of illusion, to understand that everything we see, everything we touch, everything we smell, everything we hear will disappear, is not an easy concept for people to grasp. And especially when you're younger, it's a much more difficult concept to grasp because it's all that you know. You haven't been shown anything differently, and you haven't even been involved yet with the fact that people disappear from the world. The Buddha, when he was young, was raised in a palace, and his father never let him see death and never let him see the difficulties in the world. It was only when he got outside of the palace and saw the sorrow and the trauma and the difficulty and the death that was going on outside that he began to realize the temporary nature of existence. Now, we are trying to understand that temporary nature of existence. And while we try to understand that temporary nature of existence, we still have to live within the confines of this material, illusory world, which is temporary. But in certain ways, we have to treat it as if it weren't temporary. We have to take care of things within this world. We, each of us, have been given responsibilities for things to do in the world. If we have a family, it is our responsibility to take care of that family. And to take care of that family, we have to do certain things. We have to become educated, we have to work, we have to earn money, or else we can't fulfill that responsibility. The prophet was a businessman. He worked with caravans and he was known to be fair and he made a profit. We, each of us, have to work and learn how to make our own way within this world. But we also have to learn to do things in a subtle way, not in an ostentatious way. We shouldn't be grandiose. We should be refined and restrained. Yet, we should also take care of the business that we have to take care of. We have to look at things and understand that they are not permanent, that they are temporary. And we have to look at the treasures in this world and realize that these treasures are secondary to the treasures of our Lord, that these treasures are secondary to what is available through our Lord, and that these treasures in the world are not something that we should give our allegiance to. There was a student who came to a great teacher, and the student understood the etiquette of being with a teacher. And he sat and he listened to the talks, and he never said anything. Finally, one day, the teacher said to him, "Is there anything you would like to say to me? Is there anything you would like to ask me?" And the young man said, "I had a number of teachers before you, and I had great respect for those teachers. And I would like to know what connection, if any, they have to you. And if they don't have any connection to you, I would like you to help me forget about them." And the teacher looked at him and said, "You still carry an attachment to the men who taught you. You still carry an attachment to your old teachers. You carry an attachment to the creeds that they taught you. Somewhere along the line, you are going to have to learn that you can't have an attachment to creeds. You call that attachment to creeds holy, but in essence, it's just an attachment to form. And as long as you carry that attachment to form, you're going to call that attachment grace, when in essence, it's holding you down. If you want to enter into wisdom, you have to go beyond attachment. You have to go beyond attachment to form, beyond attachment to creeds. And people will call all kinds of things holy in this world. Some will call statues holy. Some will call fruit holy. Some will call various foods holy. The truth is that none of these things are permanent. And the only permanence is within the wisdom that takes you towards divinity. That pathway has a permanence to it because it ends up in that place of permanence. It ends up with that which is one. All of the intermediary steps have to be left behind. And no matter how difficult those leaving behind those intermediate steps are, they have to be left behind in order to learn the truth. Our attachment to form will and does limit us to form. So somehow we have to go beyond form, even though we may have loved that form. I am almost married for 50 years. And our relationship over the course of time has altered. In the beginning, we were form for each other. We are now much more spirit towards each other. We are much more essence towards each other. The relationship has changed. And our relationship with the world has to change. As we are younger, our needs are stronger. As we are younger, our lusts are stronger. But as we become older, lust wanes, and we begin to understand more the essence of things. And our relationship changes from form to essence. And hopefully it changes from form to attributes, from form to qualities. And as the qualities become more apparent to us, and we understand the formless qualities which are the true nature of our Lord, and we become more involved with those qualities, then our attachment to form lessens and lessens and lessens. And as that attachment to form lessens, we become simpler, simpler in our tastes, simpler in our attitudes, humbler in our reaction to other people, less involved with the egocentric self, and we begin to lose the I. As we begin to lose the I, we become more integrated into the unity of existence, more integrated into reality, more truthful, more understanding the nature of truth, less and less hypocritical. There was a king, and this king was an idol worshiper. And he had certain things that he needed. And he came to his idol and he prayed to his idol. And he told the idol about the things that he needed. And he said to his idol, if you grant me these things, the first 3 people who walk outside my castle, I will have them brought in and I will make them worship you. And after a few days, the things that the king wanted were granted. So he told his guards to bring in the first 3 people who passed by the castle. And it turned out that one of them was a scholar, one of them was a Sayyid. A Sayyid is one who is a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. And the third one was a very, very poor man, in fact, a beggar. And they brought them in before the king, and he took them before the idol. And he said to them, and all of them were Muslims, he said to them, you must now pray before this idol, you must believe in this idol, or I will have to punish you, and my punishment shall be severe. So the scholar thought, and he said, this is a force outside of my ability to control. It is inappropriate for me to allow myself to be killed. It is inappropriate for me to be punished like that. Therefore, I will pretend to believe in the idol, and God will forgive me because he'll understand my circumstances. And he prayed to the idol. The Sayyid thought, I am of royal blood. And because I am of royal blood, I have compensation for doing things like that. I am given a pathway around things like this, so I can also pray to the idol. When it came for the beggar, he pronounced verbally. He said, I am not like the scholar, and I have no deep thoughts. I am not like the Sayyid, born of royal blood. I have no reason. I have no excuse. I cannot pray to the idol. And the king saw this, and he understood that the most humble of men understood reality, yet the Sayyid and the scholar were hypocrites. When he saw this, it cured him of idol worship, and he gave the beggar gold, and he put the other 2 in the dungeon for a period of time to be determined later. When we go through our lives, It's very easy for us to come up with reasoning. It's very easy for us to come up with excuses. It's very easy for us to maneuver around why we don't have to do this or we don't have to do that. But can we get to the point where we don't find excuses? Can we get to the point where reality is what we see and what reality is what we give obeisance to, as opposed to giving obeisance to the world and to our place in the world? You see, there are so many pleasantries in this world. There are so many things that we think give us some kind of joy, give us some kind of happiness. But in truth, these are all very, very minor pleasantries and joys compared to the pleasantries and joys of our Lord and what our Lord has to offer us. And somehow we have to begin to understand that what is available from our Lord through wisdom is greater than anything that we can get in this world. And we also have to separate wisdom from form. So while we're in this world, there is a tendency to attach ourselves to form. There's a tendency to attach ourselves to a religion, but the religion isn't God. There is a tendency to attach ourselves to scriptures, but the scriptures aren't God. There's a tendency to attach ourselves to so many things that we label divine, but there is only one divinity, and that divinity encompasses everything. And if we attach ourselves to things that separate divinity into sections, or separate divinity into something that is for us and not for everybody else, we are not worshiping that which is divine. We are worshiping our idea of that which is divine, and we are worshiping our own attitude towards that which is divine. Somehow we have to cleanse ourselves of that kind of worship. The divinity that we worship has to be a limitless divinity. We cannot put limits on divinity. We cannot segregate divinity into sections. We aren't permitted to do it. We aren't allowed to do it. And in truth, we can't do it. Because once we begin to do it, we're not worshiping divinity any longer. We're worshiping our own ideas. And in worshiping our own ideas, we are leading ourselves astray from the truth. And when we begin to understand that, then we can begin to go in the appropriate direction. In this world, there are men who are saints. There are men who have bypassed, transcended, become higher than average man. And we write about them. We tell stories about them because they're such unique beings. There was a time when all men were honest, but they didn't know there was something special about them because they were all the same. There was a time when all men had integrity, but they didn't know there was something different about them because they all had integrity. There was a time when all men believed in God, and they believed so wholeheartedly without hypocrisy, and they didn't know there was something special or different about them. There was a time when all men walked the earth as saints, but they didn't know there was something different about them, and they didn't hold themselves up to be different. And because they were all the same, there was no need to write a history about them, because there was nothing special about each one except that they were all special. So when this time happened, there is no history of it because there was nothing to write down, because it was all that which is natural. Now, we need to enter into that phase where we are natural. My Sheikh, Muhammad Rahim Bawa Muhaiyaddeen, was often asked to talk about his story, to talk about his life, to talk about how he got to where he is and what he'd done and his accomplishments and so on. And his answer was almost always the same. I have not been placed here to talk about my story. I have been placed here to talk about his story. And his story is in truth the only story. And it is his story that we must come to know. And in coming to know his story, we can come to know our story. And in knowing the truth about our story, we'll know about his story. But what happens in this world is we try and separate ourselves from all other stories, including his story. So we try to make ourselves individually unique. We try to make ourselves outside of his story somehow, as if we're separate from that one story, as if we're separate from that one unity, as if we're separate somehow and unique somehow and alone somehow and dual somehow, I and then he. But that is not the truth. The truth is that there is but one, and either we integrate into that one, or we live a lie, we live hypocrisy, we live in illusion, and we continue to live in illusion and worship illusion. Everyone tries to tell you that their version of illusion is the truth. Everyone tries to tell you that their ideas are the truth. Everyone tries to tell you that their way is the only way, and only in joining their way can you find the truth. But reality is but one. Reality is inclusive. Reality takes in everything. And unless we are capable of taking in everything, we cannot find the truth. We can just find a small segment, a small idea, a small thought, and we call it the truth. For some people, wealth is the truth. For some people, fame is the truth. For some people, lust is the truth. Everyone else has an idea of what the truth is. There was a miser who lived on a hill, and his entire life was spent in the accumulation of wealth. And he had become very rich. But after years went by and he became older, he began to realize that there was something missing in his life. And he wasn't able to find peace. He wasn't able to find contentment. He wasn't able to grasp what the purpose of all of this accumulation of wealth was. It seemed not to make any sense to him. And from his hill, he looked down at the people below him, and he saw a vendor selling fruits. And he went down to the vendor and said, "How much are the fruits?" And the vendor said to him, "They're 10 cents a piece." And he said to the vendor, "Sell them to me for 3 for 10 cents. And the vendor said, "How can I do that? I buy them for 9.5 cents a piece. I sell them for 10 cents. I make a half a cent per fruit. If I were to sell you 3 for 10 cents, look at the amount of money I was losing." And the rich man kept arguing with him, and the vendor refused to sell him the fruit. Finally, he went back up to his house and looked down, and he saw this poor woodcutter come up to the vendor. And the woodcutter said to the vendor, "How much are the fruits?" And he said, 10 cents a piece. He said, "Give me 25. And he took the fruits and he distributed them to all of his friends, and they ate and they sang and they played. Meanwhile, back up on the hill, the rich man had a friend who came by every once in a while. And this friend happened to be a sheikh. And the sheikh came by this one day, and he complained to the sheikh. He said, "I can't find any peace. I can't find any joy. I'm richer than everybody in this valley. And yet I look below, and the everyday working people who have very little, if anything, are much more joyous than I am. What can I do?" And the wise man said to him, "Only peace can find peace. Let's look below and see what's going on." And they looked, and they saw this same woodcutter every day after he worked would go and buy fruits, distribute them, and enjoy himself and eat with his friends. And the sheikh said to the man, "Get a bag and put 95 coins in the bag and give it to me." And the man did it. And the sheikh took the bag, walked down into the valley, and threw the bag into the little hut that the woodcutter lived. Later, they watched, and they saw the woodcutter found the bag. And he looked at what was in it, and he began to count the coins. And he counted 95 coins. And then they heard him say, "God, you've been so generous to me. You've given me 95 coins. Couldn't you have given me 5 more so I would have 100? And the next day, when the woodcutter came home from work, instead of going out and buying fruit, he put the coins in the bag, and now he had 98 coins. And his friends came to him to come outside with him and eat and play or do whatever they did. And he was so worried about his bag of money that he hid in the house. He didn't want to leave the house in case somebody stole it. So he told them that he was ill and he couldn't go out. And the next day, the same thing. He got up earlier so he could earn a little more money, so he could get closer to 100. And after he got to 100 and he got to 101, he said, "If I keep this up, soon I can have 200, and maybe I can even reach 1,000." The joy went out of him. And they could see from up top that the joy had gone out of him. And the sheikh said, do you see what happens? He's going through what you went through. Not as successful as you were, but the essence is the same. If you want to have joy, come with me. Give away everything that you have and come with me. The miser thought and thought, and he said, this is my only chance to find real joy. And he did what the sheikh told him. And they began to walk. And they got hungry, and they passed a little hut. And they stopped, and they asked if they knocked on the door to see if anyone was home. And there was an old woman. And they asked, did she have any food for them? And she said, I have very little. I have a salted mango and some gruel. And if you would like that, I'll give you each some. So she gave them each a little portion. And the miser ate it. And it was the most delicious food he had ever eaten. And after he finished, he fell asleep. And when the sheikh woke him up, he said, how long have I been sleeping? He said, you slept from the afternoon through the evening into the last day, into the next day. And the man said, I've never slept so soundly in my life. And he said to him, because you've never been this free in your life. You are now at the point where your attachment to the world, your attachment to form, your attachment to wealth has left you. And because it's left you, you can now find the truth in the essence of things. You can now find the truth in the qualities of things. You can now find the truth in your Lord. And it's like that for each of us. We have our obligations in the world, but we have to do them in moderation. We have to be able to handle them in moderation. We have to supply ourselves with houses. We have to supply ourselves with furniture. We have to supply ourselves with food. We have to supply our family with all of these things. We have to be generous. Now, we have to be generous in two ways. We have to be generous in the material way, but we also have to be generous in love and in kindness and in mercy and in compassion and in justice. We have to be generous in the qualities, and we have to be generous in the material sense. The sheikhs are generous in the qualities. They are able to produce love in enormous quantities, and people come to them for the sake of this love, to have this love poured on them. And this love heals their wounds. This love heals their trauma. This love heals all of the difficulties that their life has gone through. This love revives them in a way that they can be revived into becoming a true human. Through this love, man can transcend his state. Through this true love, man can rise from his attachment to the world to be free of the world. And when man becomes free of the world, he can do his duty in the world without attachment to the world. So the burden of the work within the world goes away because there's no attachment to the work that's done any longer. It's the attachment that causes our weariness. It's the attachment that causes us to be tired. It's the attachment that makes everything difficult in the world. Once the attachment is lost, once we are no longer worrying about results, we are no longer worrying about outcomes. We are no longer worrying about expectations. Then a freedom comes into us that is peaceful and content. If we are not in a state of expectation, we can be in a state of contentment. But if we are in a state of expectation, then we can't be in a state of contentment, because desire is driving us, and desire can never be fulfilled. Desire can never become content. It's like at the train station, one train comes up, and when that leaves, another train arrives, and these trains never stop. And that's the nature of desire. It's a train that never stops. Once one leaves the station, another one immediately comes into the station. And if we are subject to desire, and if we fall prey to desire, we become the slave of desire. Now imagine if we changed names from the slave of Allah, Abdullah, to the slave of desire, Abd, desire. Abd means slave. I mean, think about it. We're supposed to be transferring our energy, channeling our energy towards reality, and instead we channel it towards our attempts to acquire this world, our attempts to hold on to this world. So we have to begin to learn how to walk a path that does what we're supposed to do within the world, yet does it without attachment, does it without expectation, and does it without grieving if things don't go the way that we want within this world. So our effort has to be put towards taking care of the things we have to take care of in this world. But our loyalty isn't towards this world. Our loyalty is towards God. And working that fine line is the straight path towards reality. We live in this interim space. We live in this interim world, and we have to take care of that which needs to be taken care of in this interim reality for us. But we must also know that it is not our ultimate reality. And our ultimate reality is where our true focus has to project. Our ultimate reality is what we have to understand. We are in an interim phase. We came from the world of souls into this world, and now we are meant to go to the world of light, to God's world. And the world of light has no place for form. So we're in this transition phase. We have to understand that. And we have to do what's appropriate for all the phases of our existence. To do this, we have to ask God's help. To do this, we have to ask to be free of attachment. To do this, we have to be free of desire. We have to be free of our mind's interference with everything that we do. We have to become free of our egocentric self. We have to become free of our differences. And we have to be able to feel others' hungers, to feel others' pain, and to feel others' joy. We have to be able to be combined with all of humanity and not separate anyone from us. In the same way that we expect Allah to forgive us and hold us close to Him, we have to forgive others and hold them close to us. We can't expect that we will be treated by God in some way other than the way we treat the rest of the world. So we must become compassion. We must become mercy. We must become forgiving. And in that way, compassion will shine on us, mercy will shine on us, forgiveness will come to us, and we will be released into the light, into the ones who find favor with our Lord. May it be so for each and every one of us. Ameen, Ameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.